Hi guys, how old are you? I'd love to see the age range of our viewers. Write your age below.
So you're just gonna leave the family? That was my mother's voice, tight with passive aggression, as if I had just canceled Christmas rather than quietly stepping away from responsibilities no one ever thanked me for. But the truth is, I didn't leave out of rage. I didn't slam any doors. I didn't scream or send any dramatic texts. I just exited. Quietly. Calculated. Fully aware. The way a person does when they realize they're nothing but a fixture in a house full of people who stopped seeing them a long time ago. My 38th birthday landed on a Thursday this year. It was one of those muggy late summer days where even the air feels like it's judging you for not being somewhere better. I was at work, buried in end-of-quarter reports, crunching numbers while the younger staff passed around cupcakes and sang badly for someone turning 25. They offered me one, and I smiled, took a bite, and quietly watched the clock tick past noon, past 2, past 5. Not a single message. Not a single call. Not a damn emoji from my mother, who still posts her cat's birthday on Facebook like it's a national holiday. My dad? Nothing. My sister Melissa, who lives 2 suburbs over and borrows my Costco card more often than she calls to check in. Not a word. And Derek, my brother, the man-child who still hasn't paid me back for his car insurance last year, posted a meme about adulting being hard and went live from a backyard barbecue that I was clearly not invited to. I sat there in my car after work, engine idling in the fading light, and tried to swallow the familiar lump in my throat that always showed up around this time of year. I thought maybe they'd surprise me when I got home. Maybe there would be a cake on the table or at least a card slipped under my door like they used to do when I was a teenager and still mattered. But no. My apartment was just how I'd left it, quiet, clean, and hollow. I ordered takeout, poured a glass of wine, and scrolled through social media like a masochist, watching other people celebrate their lives, surrounded by family who remembered they existed. And just when I thought I could forget the sting, it hit harder, because as I was cleaning up the takeout containers, my phone buzzed. It was a group photo. My family. All of them. At a restaurant. Melissa, Derek, Mom and Dad, even Uncle Todd, who lives an hour away and only shows up for birthdays or funerals. They were all smiling, drinks raised, captioned, family night. No tag. No, wish you were here. Nothing. Just a perfectly filtered image of them, celebrating something, or maybe just each other, on my birthday, while I sat alone eating cold pad thai in silence. I didn't cry. I didn't throw the phone. I just stood there in my kitchen, one socked foot on the cold tile, the other on the rug, and felt this click, this final, irreversible realization that I wasn't just forgotten. I was optional. I had been optional for years. They hadn't seen me in so long they didn't even notice when I wasn't in the picture anymore. The next morning, I called my mother. Not because I was angry, but because I needed to hear the excuse. I needed to hear what kind of spin she'd try to put on it this time, what combination of guilt and false logic she'd use to make it seem like I was the unreasonable one. She picked up on the third ring, her voice cheerful, almost rehearsed. "Kara, hi, sweetheart. Everything okay?" I asked her how dinner was last night. The pause on the other end was slight but telling. "Oh, dinner? Oh, it was just something spontaneous. Melissa wanted to treat the family. Derek's had a tough week at work, and your dad's been stressed with the garage roof. We didn't want to bother you. We thought you were busy." There it was. The sentence. The sentence I had heard my whole life, in one form or another. We thought you were busy. I could have tattooed it on my ribs. That's how often it's been said to me. They use it like a shield, a catch-all excuse for every time they left me out, overlooked me, or needed to explain why they never really made room for me in their lives. I didn't respond right away. I just let it hang. I could hear her breathing on the other end, waiting for me to fill the space with reassurance, to say, "Oh no, it's fine," like I always did, like the good daughter does. But this time, I didn't give her the out. "It was my birthday," I said finally, not accusing, just stating it plainly, like a fact on a weather report. She gasped, one of those performative inhales that almost made me laugh. "Oh my God, Kara, was it?" "Oh honey, I swear, with everything going on, I completely lost track of time. You know how the days blur together. I didn't say a word. Not, it's okay. Not, I understand. Not, don't worry about it. I just let her scramble, let her throw excuses at a wall, hoping something would stick. Eventually, the silence got too uncomfortable for her. We'll make it up to you, okay? Let's do something next week, just us girls. You pick the place. That was the moment something inside me started to shift. Not explode, just quietly reroute. I realized I'd spent my life making room for them, adjusting to their availability, their forgetfulness, their inability to see me as a full human being with needs of my own. And I was done doing that. I ended the call shortly after, polite as ever, and sat down with my planner, not to pencil in a dinner with my mother, but to start outlining an entirely different kind of birthday gift to myself. No announcements. No fights. But it was the beginning of the end, and they had no idea what was coming. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of my neighbor's dog barking at the garbage truck, a sound I'd grown so used to over the years that it blended into the rhythm of my early mornings like the clink of my spoon against the coffee mug or the dull hum of the fridge. I sat there at my small kitchen table, staring at the same half-dead plant I kept meaning to replace, and watched the steam rise from my cup while replaying the phone call with my mother over and over again in my head like an old cassette tape stuck in a loop, warping slightly every time it hit the same words. We thought you were busy. Not, we forgot. Not, we messed up. Not even, I'm sorry. Just that same vague, careless sentence dressed in familiarity, like she had said it so often she'd forgotten what it even meant anymore. But I hadn't forgotten, not the way it had followed me my whole life like a shadow I couldn't shake, appearing every time I needed something and received nothing but indifference in return. I remembered being 11 and coming home with a spelling bee trophy, beaming with the kind of pride kids don't learn to be ashamed of yet, walking into the kitchen to show it off only to be told, without looking up from the stove, "That's nice, Kara. But can you take the trash out?" I remembered being 16 and getting left behind at school after a late practice, watching every car pull away one by one until the parking lot was empty, and when I finally walked home and knocked on the front door, my mom blinked at me like I was a stranger. "We thought you were getting a ride," she said. I remembered being 23, sitting alone in the back of a church at Melissa's wedding, holding my own hand while our cousin Amy clinked glasses with my date, who, I later found out, had been nudged away from me by Melissa herself. "You were so busy with work," Mom had said afterward. "We didn't want to stress you out with all the planning." Busy. Always too busy. As if I had chosen to live like an afterthought. As if I had voted myself off the island. I didn't cry, not that day. Instead, I got dressed, went to work, and kept my head down, the way I always did. I smiled when I had to. I answered emails. I ate lunch alone at my desk while everyone else congregated in the break room, talking about their weekends, their families, the birthday parties and brunches and game nights. I sat there quietly, letting their stories float past me like cigarette smoke in the wind, pleasant enough from a distance, but choking up close. And then, during one particularly slow hour in the afternoon, I opened my banking app to check the pending payments, and there it was, a charge on the family shared grocery account. $128, charged by Melissa, the day after my birthday. My birthday. I clicked into the receipt, and it unfolded like a punch to the gut, party-size platters, a cake, a bottle of rose, even candles. That wasn't a spontaneous dinner. That was a celebration. They just hadn't celebrated me. I could almost hear her voice in my head, Melissa's faux surprise tone, so sweet it could rot your teeth. "Oh, that was for Derek's new promotion. We didn't think you'd want to come all the way over on a weeknight. You're always working." I sat there, staring at the screen, and realized something deeply, bone-chillingly true. I could disappear completely from their lives, physically, emotionally, financially, and they might not notice until something they used to lean on me for stopped working. And so I began to test that theory. Not out of spite, but out of morbid curiosity. I stopped texting in the family group chat. I ignored the call from my dad asking for help with the printer. I didn't respond when Melissa sent a meme in our siblings-only thread. I let it all sit, unanswered, like plates on a table after a dinner party, left for someone else to clean. And what happened? Nothing. No follow-up. No, "Are you okay?" No knock on the door. Not even a question. That weekend, I ran into our old neighbor, Carol, at the gas station. She looked me up and down with that soft pity that older women perfect over the years and asked, "How's your family?" "Your mom says you've been distant." And there it was again, "You've been distant." As if distance just happens in one direction, as if I had simply drifted out to sea without a storm pushing me away. I nodded politely and said, "We're all doing our own thing lately," and drove away before the conversation could get any more performative. But inside, I was burning with the weight of all the things I wanted to scream, all the times I'd been told I was sensitive or overreacting, when all I'd ever asked for was to be treated like a person, not a support beam they only noticed when it cracked. That night, I sat on my couch in the dark, my phone buzzing beside me as the group chat pinged with gifs and in-jokes and yet another inside reference to a show I stopped watching years ago, not because I didn't like it, but because watching it alone didn't feel the same after Melissa and Derek started doing weekly watch parties without inviting me. I picked up my phone, stared at the screen, and realized I wasn't sad anymore. I was tired. Tired of explaining myself. Tired of lowering my expectations like I was doing them a favor. Tired of being the one who always reached out first. So I powered off the phone, not because I was mad, but because I was done listening to static. They thought I was busy. But they were about to learn the difference between being busy and being gone. It wasn't anger that guided me, it was clarity, the kind that doesn't scream or pace or throw dishes against walls, but rather sits perfectly still in the center of your chest like a stone dropped into water. Not disrupting the surface right away, but slowly pulling everything under, dragging truth to the bottom where it can no longer be denied or ignored. I didn't have an outburst. Didn't confront anyone in some cinematic, table-flipping moment where I listed every one of their offenses while they sat stunned into silence. That would have required an audience, and the truth is, I wasn't interested in performing anymore. I'd done that long enough, smiled through the guilt, nodded through the excuses, made peace with being forgotten over and over again just to avoid the look on their faces when I told them, flat out, that they hurt me. And so instead of giving them a speech, I gave them silence, and in that silence, I crafted my exit with a kind of calm precision that startled even me. The first thing I did was log into the family's grocery membership account. It had been mine initially, set up years ago when Melissa had her second kid and complained about how expensive formula had become, and I, single with a steady job, volunteered to add everyone to my plan just to make it easier. Of course, over time, easier meant I paid for it entirely while they made full use of it, racking up points and discounts, while I occasionally got a half-hearted thank you in the form of a shared cookie platter or a leftover pie after a family dinner I hadn't even been invited to. I went into the billing section, changed the settings, and removed every authorized user. No warning. No farewell. Just unlinked names and revoked access. It took less than 2 minutes, and yet the feeling that washed over me when I clicked confirm was enormous, a mix of release and grief, like I had just buried a part of myself I'd been carrying for decades. Next was the family phone plan, which I had been foolish enough to offer to manage when our old plan expired and Derek claimed his credit was too messy to open a new one, and Mom said she didn't understand the fine print, and Dad just shrugged and said, "Whatever you think is best." That was always my role, wasn't it? The one who understood the fine print, who handled the boring things, who paid attention so they didn't have to. For years, I covered the taxes and the insurance on 4 lines, convinced that it was just easier to keep it all in one place. I didn't even mind at first. But now, with every monthly payment hitting my account without a word of acknowledgement, with every added fee from Derek's overage charges or Melissa's kids watching hours of YouTube in the car, the plan felt less like a shared resource and more like a leash I had willingly fastened around my own neck. So I called the provider, and after a 30-minute hold and some paperwork, I split my line from the others. The rep asked if I wanted to notify the other lines, and I almost laughed. "No," I said calmly, "I think they'll figure it out on their own. And when they do, they can call me if their phones still work." Finally, I logged into my employee benefits portal. This one took a bit more thought, not because I doubted my decision, but because the implications were bigger. Years ago, after my dad had a minor heart scare and struggled to find decent coverage, I added him and mom as dependents under my employer-provided insurance plan. It had been a temporary solution, or at least that's what I told myself, but like everything else in my family, temporary meant permanent the moment it became convenient. And when Derek lost his job for a few months, I added him too, and then forgot to remove him once he got another, because he never mentioned it and I never pushed. I clicked through the tabs health, dental, vision, and removed each of them. The site gave me a warning, asked if I was sure, if I understood the potential consequences. I checked the boxes one by one, without hesitation. For once, I was choosing myself. Not out of spite, not out of revenge, but because I was tired of being their safety net while they refused to notice the holes forming beneath me. The silence afterward was deafening. Days passed. No one noticed. Or if they did, they said nothing, maybe assuming it was a glitch or a billing issue or something they could ignore until it resolved itself. That's what they were good at, after all, ignoring things until someone else fixed them. But the cracks began to form quickly. On Friday, Melissa texted me a half-annoyed, half-confused message that read, "Hey, do you know why my grocery card isn't working?" I didn't respond. On Sunday, Derek called twice, but left no voicemail. Monday morning, Mom texted, "Your father tried to fill his prescription and the insurance wouldn't go through. Can you check on that?" Still, I said nothing. It was fascinating, really, how fast their silence cracked the moment I withdrew the resources they'd never acknowledged as mine in the first place. I didn't post about it, didn't make any passive-aggressive status updates or vague statements online. I simply kept living my life, waking up, going to work, cooking for one, sleeping in my own bed with the kind of peace that only arrives when you stop waiting for someone to recognize your worth and start acting like it's not up for debate. But inside me, something was building, not anger, not even sadness, but a slow, steady confidence that came from finally understanding the math of my own value. For years, I had calculated love and favors done, birthdays remembered, apologies offered. I'd measured care in text messages, invitations, and the way people showed up or didn't. And now, for the first time, the math was simple. I gave, they took. I withdrew, they stumbled. And still, they hadn't said the one thing I needed to hear. Not, "Are you okay?" Not, "We're sorry." Just silence, punctuated by questions about missing conveniences. That was when I realized they didn't miss me. They missed what I gave them. And if that's all I was, if my presence had been reduced to a password, a plan, a policy, then it was time for them to figure out how to live without those things. Just like I had figured out how to live without their attention. They thought I was busy. But they were about to learn that when someone disappears quietly, they've usually been planning it for a very, very long time. It didn't take long for the shift to occur, not the dramatic kind that storms through the front door with accusations and shouting, but the subtle, creeping kind that seeps into the cracks of a long-ignored foundation, pressing against the silence until it groans under the weight of everything unsaid. The first true sign that my absence had finally registered came on a Tuesday evening, exactly 12 days after I removed myself from the systems that had, for years, tethered me to a family that couldn't be bothered to remember the most basic pieces of who I was. I had just finished folding laundry when my phone lit up with a message from Melissa, the tone of which instantly struck me as strange, not because it was hostile or overtly dramatic, but because it was something far more unnerving. It was nice. "Hey sis," she wrote, "just thinking about you. Wanna grab lunch this week? Just us girls." My treat. The fact that she added "my treat" made me almost laugh out loud, not because I didn't think she meant it, but because I could feel the tension beneath it. The forced pleasantry of someone trying to make amends without actually acknowledging the reason for the fracture in the first place. And that's what struck me most: no apology, no recognition of what had changed, no mention of the birthday, the phone plan, the insurance, the grocery card. Just a breezy suggestion that we sit down and pretend the waters hadn't been rising quietly for years. I didn't answer, not because I was playing games, but because I needed space to understand how I even felt about her reaching out. I wasn't someone who held grudges in the dramatic, performative way, no blacklists, no furious diary entries with names circled in red ink. But I also wasn't interested in performing forgiveness for people who hadn't even admitted there was something to forgive. It's hard to rebuild a bridge when the other side is still acting like the river doesn't exist. The next morning, a voicemail from my mother awaited me, short, clipped, strangely formal, like she was calling an old coworker rather than her daughter. "Hi Kara, it's Mom. Just wanted to check in and see how you're doing. We've all noticed you've been kind of distant lately. If there's something wrong, we'd really like to talk. Maybe you can come over this weekend." And that word, distant, sat in my chest like a stone, heavy with implication, as if the burden of absence was mine to carry alone, as if I had drifted into isolation of my own accord and not been slowly pushed there over time by years of being overlooked, dismissed, and casually forgotten. Still, I said nothing, because if you say too much, they tell you you're dramatic, and if you say too little, they say you're cold, and if you say nothing at all, only then do they begin to wonder if maybe, just maybe, something is wrong with the way things have always been. By Friday, my father, who rarely called anyone unless it involved fixing a broken faucet or asking where the remote was, had left me a message of his own, and his voice, unlike the others, carried something different. It wasn't guilt or manipulation or even genuine concern. It was confusion. A man baffled by a system he never bothered to understand, finally noticing the gears had stopped turning. "Kara, your mother's worried. I don't know what's going on, but it'd be good if you could stop by. We just want to talk. You don't have to be so dramatic about things." And that, more than anything else, sealed it for me, the word dramatic, tossed into the mix like seasoning, subtle but potent, revealing more about him than he probably realized. Because to him, and maybe to all of them, my silence, my withdrawal, my decision to stop being a utility disguised as a family member was less about pain and more about theatrics. And in their minds, the true crime wasn't what they had done or failed to do, but the fact that I was no longer playing along. That weekend, I cleaned my apartment as if I were preparing for a visit I knew I wouldn't allow, scrubbing the stove and vacuuming under the couch, not because I expected anyone to see it, but because the ritual of cleaning gave shape to my emotions. A way to push the chaos into corners and tell myself I was still in control of something. I played soft music, opened the windows, made tea. I felt calm. Unusually calm. The kind of calm that follows a long, slow unraveling when the thread finally breaks and nothing collapses after all. I sat down with a notebook and wrote out every birthday I could remember, mine, theirs, all the ones I had organized, planned, paid for, cleaned up after. I remembered the surprise party I threw for Derek when he turned 30, the way he showed up late and drunk, but still managed to demand that I hadn't picked the right playlist. I remembered the anniversary dinner I arranged for Mom and Dad, complete with a slideshow of old photos and a reservation at the same Italian place they went to on their first date, which Mom barely acknowledged before asking me if I could help pay for her new prescription glasses. I didn't write those things down to keep score. I wrote them down to see the picture they formed when laid out honestly, without excuses or edits. And what I saw was not a family that had made a mistake. What I saw was a pattern, an unbroken loop of me showing up and them forgetting, of me giving and them assuming, of me being present while they simply expected. That evening, I received a group text, the first of its kind in over a year, inviting me to a family dinner at my parents' house on Sunday. "Let's clear the air," Melissa wrote. "We miss you. We don't know what's going on, but let's just talk. Please come." And for the first time, I didn't feel guilt clawing at my throat. I didn't feel panic or obligation or even fear. What I felt was something new. Power. Not the kind that seeks revenge or dominance, but the quiet, resolute kind that comes from knowing exactly who you are and finally refusing to apologize for it. I didn't respond immediately. I let the message sit, blinking at the top of my screen like a dare, and thought about what I would say if I did show up. Would I give them the list? The receipt of all the times they forgot? Would I make a speech? Break down? Walk out? Or would I do what I'd already been doing, walk in with my head high, speak once, and walk out knowing that whatever came next, it would be on my terms? Because now, after all these years of being busy, they finally wanted a conversation. But I wasn't sure they were ready for the one I was planning to have. I arrived 10 minutes early, not because I was eager to see them or nervous about what might unfold, but because old habits die hard and being punctual, being prepared, being the one who showed up on time with everything in order, was still etched so deeply into my bones that even now, after everything, I couldn't quite bring myself to abandon it. The house looked exactly as it always had, that beige suburban sameness that I had both loved and resented over the years, a structure built on predictability, with flower beds that were always 1 week past needing attention, and a welcome mat that hadn't truly welcomed anyone in a long time. I sat in the car for a moment, staring at the driveway where I had learned to ride a bike, where Melissa scraped her knee and screamed like the world was ending, and where my father once taught Derek to throw a baseball and told me, in a half-joking tone that stung more than it should have, that catching wasn't really a girl's thing. I had parked there so many times before, usually with a bag of groceries or a container of leftovers or a wrapped gift tucked under my arm, ready to offer something, ready to contribute, ready to fill in the gaps. But today, I carried nothing in my hands except a plain manila folder, the weight of which felt far heavier than its contents suggested, because inside it was not a document or a threat or anything dramatic. It was simply the record. The quiet accounting of years of financial ties, receipts, premium summaries, itemized grocery transactions, and monthly phone bills, annotated with names and usage. It wasn't meant to shame or shock them. It wasn't a bill or a ledger. It was a mirror. When I rang the bell, I heard movement inside, hushed voices, footsteps, the unmistakable sound of a family rearranging itself at the last minute to appear more intact than it really was. My mother opened the door, her face caught somewhere between a smile and an apology, though neither reached her eyes. "Kara," she said, as if saying my name with softness could erase everything that had been done with silence. She stepped aside to let me in, and I crossed the threshold without removing my shoes, not out of disrespect, but because I wanted to maintain the smallest barrier between myself and the floor I had walked barefoot on for so many years. The living room looked like it always did, slightly cluttered, perfectly lived in, and full of memories that were only half comforting. My father sat in his usual chair, legs crossed, one hand resting on the armrest like he was preparing for a negotiation rather than a family conversation. Melissa was perched on the edge of the couch, her posture tense, her eyes scanning me like she expected me to pull out a list of grievances and start reading them aloud. Derek leaned against the wall with his arms folded, already wearing the defensive smirk that told me he'd decided this was all some kind of overreaction before a single word had been spoken. I sat down in the armchair across from them and said nothing at first. I watched their expressions flicker, impatience from Derek, discomfort from Melissa, expectation from my mother, and resignation from my father. Eventually, Mom cleared her throat and spoke, her voice careful, as if she was trying not to provoke me. "We just want to understand, Kara. We've all felt this distance lately, and we don't know what we did to make you so upset." And there it was, again, the word upset, that convenient umbrella used to reduce anything complicated, anything rooted in years of accumulated pain, to a temporary emotional flare-up that could be soothed with tea and awkward hugs. I considered replying with something sharp, something that would make them flinch, but instead I reached into my bag and handed the folder to my mother. She took it hesitantly, opened it, and began flipping through the pages with growing confusion. "These are just phone bills? Grocery records?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "And health insurance premiums. Shared costs. Things I've covered, in full or in part, for years. I'm not asking for reimbursement. I just thought you should see it. Not because of the money, but because every time you forgot me, every time you told yourselves I was busy or fine or not the kind of daughter who needed anything in return, I was also the one paying for dinner, for phones, for your medications. And no one noticed, not even once." Melissa leaned forward, her expression beginning to crack, the defensiveness giving way to something more fragile. "But Kara, why didn't you ever say anything?" And in that moment, I felt the familiar rage begin to stir, not the kind that explodes outward, but the quieter, sadder kind that comes from being asked to explain yourself yet again, to relive it for the benefit of those who never had to live it in the first place. I did, I said softly. You just didn't hear me. I said it every time I showed up for a birthday that no one remembered in return. Every time I covered your share of the groceries because I didn't want to make it awkward. Every time I asked to be included and got a message 2 days later that said, "Sorry, we thought you were busy." My father shifted in his chair, clearing his throat like he was preparing to speak, but I continued, not raising my voice, not faltering, just pressing forward like someone finally walking a road they had spent years mapping. I stopped contributing not to punish you, but to see if you'd notice I was gone. And you did, but only when it affected your bills, your benefits, your comforts. Not because you missed me, but because you missed the things I gave you. For a moment, no one said anything, and in that silence, I saw the truth land, awkward and heavy and impossible to refute. My mother looked down at the folder, and I saw her shoulders sag just slightly. Derek still looked unconvinced, like he couldn't quite compute how someone could be both generous and angry, both giving and fed up. Melissa, to her credit, looked ashamed. And yet, not one of them apologized. Not really. They spoke in half sentences, in vague acknowledgments, in words like, "We didn't realize," and "We never meant to." But no one said, "We were wrong." No one said, "We hurt you." I stood up, smoothed my blouse, and looked around the room where I had once played board games and helped decorate the Christmas tree and sat quietly while everyone else talked over me. "I appreciate the effort," I said. "Really. But I don't think I need this conversation the way I used to." My mother's lip trembled, but she didn't speak. My father nodded slowly, whether out of understanding or simply exhaustion, I couldn't say. Melissa looked like she might cry, but I didn't reach out to comfort her. I wasn't cruel, I was just done. At the door, just before stepping out, I turned and said one last thing, not with anger, not with sarcasm, but with calm finality. If you ever want a real relationship with me, not one built on assumption or convenience, but something mutual, you'll need to start over. From scratch. And this time, I won't be the only one doing the work. Then I left, my heels clicking against the walkway like a metronome, steady and sure, not glancing back even once. Because sometimes, the greatest act of love isn't staying to explain yourself again. Sometimes, it's walking away with your dignity intact. And that's exactly what I did.